podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you can please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. I'm Justice.
Justice Rajee.
Hey. So, I'm not going to dilly-dally. We just going to jump into it. So, pound for pound, which I think it has a legitimate argument for one of the greatest athletes in the history of humanity. Serena Williams played her last. I don't know if she still has a doubles match with Venus.
No, they lost. They lost.
They lost.
Earlier.
Okay, so I wasn't sure. I wasn't able to double check. But closing the door. We won between the two of them, like pound for pound, two of the best. Definitely two of the greatest athletes came from the same family.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? But we've talked about the Williams sisters before, but I think it's appropriate for us to, at this date, with that just now happening and closing out, is just to take a minute to show Serena some love, but also, just talk about kind of her impact, their impact as individuals, as a family. What's your first thought just around?
Well, my first, I'll go to the obvious first, and I think you'll probably delve into some of the not so obvious. There's the argument, frankly, I think, is between Serena Williams, Tom Brady, and LeBron James in what people would call today the greatest athlete of all time. It's like we've talked about with Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain. Like we've talked about like some other people, Jim Thorpe. Like, you know what I mean? Like you can talk about other people who did some shit that's way beyond like what we can understand today in shoes that hurt. Yeah. Right?
Right.
Like they did not have the benefit of the highest forms of like technology to be wearing space boots and ice baths and stuff, right? So I want to make sure I'm respectful of the fact that there were athletes who did amazing things before our current era. I think in our current era, there is an argument between them, and it's not a lock to assume it should be LeBron or Tom Brady, in my estimation, right? Like what she did in women's tennis for the amount of time she did it is unparalleled.
Yeah.
So she's clearly the greatest women's tennis player of all time. We can argue, is she the greatest tennis player of all time? Right? Like there's an argument there. And then there is also this argument about being the greatest athlete, just pound for pound. And I do think it's a testament that people are much more comfortable having this conversation today about her possibly being the greatest athlete versus just the greatest female athlete or the greatest female tennis player than we would have at another time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's remarkable just to think about. It takes. I'm a firm. I operate from the construct that when people are really excel in sports and athletics, right? There's the the good fortune of maybe certain things, genetically being in place, right? You got, size, power, and just for the record, because people tend to think that Serena is some sort of outlier in size and height or whatever. And she's not. Like a lot of those, women tennis players you see are fairly tall, height, strength. Like none of them, for the most part, is not whatever one may perceive. Because we as a society we perceive women, not necessarily with a clear lens on who they actually are in many levels, but especially as it pertains to sports and athletics. But there's a, to me, folks excel and at the highest levels excel in sports, because at some point they come to understand within our construct of understanding, meaning that it is not just a cognitive, you know, landing, but it's also a physical, like it's the balance between the two to then do the thing that you do very well, right? Whether that's, you know, in the sports context, is playing your sport. You know, in other contexts, that might be, you know, writing, that might be art, that might be some, you know, various forms of public speaking, sciences, whatever have you. But when someone has that deeper understanding of something, they move within it, they do it, and they also think about it, and they shape it, and they move it, and it does it. It goes other places, and it creates more opportunities. And the way uh, all the things that like have happened, you know, with her individually, on the court, you know, the beefing with line judges, and the, you know, people's perception of, you know, their decorum, right? Which is always a hard thing to read when we're dealing with black
A
folks in
slippery
America.
slope.
Slippery slope, yeah. Um, but just to be able to compete, and, you know, and not just compete, like, you know, quite frankly, some of the folks who you would say that was like the second best player, you know, of her time, or the third best player, or the, you know, whatever that top 10 for some of the people, she just was smashing them. Like, if it wasn't her sister, it'd be like, yeah, man, get out of here, man. Like, you good and all, but you ain't better than me. You know what I mean? Like, and it's, you know, there's very few sports where, I mean, tennis is obviously an individual sport primarily, you know, track and field, uh, where one person like has that, you know, window where they be like, yeah, you are the best one. Like, no one, like, we don't know anyone else right now that's playing that could knock you out the box. So it's a stunning feat when you think about it in the grand scheme, you know, of the human experience, right? Like, there's literally trillions of people, right? We in the trillions, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, of all the people, you know, and then, you know, you funnel that down to the people who had the opportunity to play tennis, and then, you know, the people who had the opportunity to be in a place that had the opportunity to play like, you know, there's all those factors. But to it's just a marvel. You know, and then, you know, not to speak of sort of the cultural impact that she has had in terms of things that have happened to her and happened with her, that then, because of who she is, you know, black woman from Compton, uh, and all of the stuff that is unasked for, but becomes a part of it as a black person excelling in our modern world, right? Where um, even, you know, with all of her fame, acclaim, and wealth, she wasn't protected well, you know, while giving birth to a child, right? Which we all know black women face, in the U.S. and other places, but particularly in the U.S. context, um, that you still have to sometimes engage with people about kind of the nature and the person who you are in a way that is, you know, is quite, you know, just keep it simple, unfair and unwarranted. But to still, you know, and then within all that, you know, be who the person you are, and um, you know, and then be successful at the thing that you came out to do. So it's quite remarkable, and we shall, you know, take a pause and take a bow, give a high five or something.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, just I think, you know, I often think about the, you know, maternal mortality idea, and like, you know, the numbers are all in all across the country. Usually black women specifically are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in childbirth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you think about that, and I think the first thing you do is you locate it in a very like, and this is like mental models, right? So this is how deep this is. The mental model goes: poor black woman who does not know how to communicate her needs and her health history, going into a doctor who doesn't understand, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we do is we connect poverty, right, to this idea.
Right.
Like this is a, and also making the assumption, however unfair, that even if someone was impoverished, that they couldn't speak up for their rights, which is a whole other subject for a whole other day.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you see that she goes through this time of like giving birth, her and Beyonce, as much as they, no one talks about it, like
Mm-hmm.
two of the most known black women in the world have the same challenges at the hospital that we affix to someone that's impoverished.
Mm-hmm.
So, for folks who are just listening, just really to think about that because for so much we think money is the answer. Um, and we don't necessarily talk about systems. But
Mm-hmm.
this is one very clear space that it was not about money. It was about systems and how people show up and how people deal with people. And it didn't matter if you were rich.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so just as you added on another thing, I kind of wanted to touch on within, I think, Serena and Venus, because I think it's important. Venus may go out a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it's difficult not to frame them as part of a continuum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how good Venus is and was, along with the fact that they probably had for a long time, the only person better than her was her own sister,
Right.
which is when you think about in the history of sports, to have one high performing person is literally one in a million. To create two people who are at the top of their game at the same time, you don't get it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's when you cue in King Richard, right?
Right.
um, because again, people say what they will, but it's like this person having the drive than any other space. But I wanted to share that when you think about the history of black tennis, you think about a lot of players, and up until a certain point, black players, relatively recently, frankly, black players always had to be like statesmen and stateswomen,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? They had to like come in and be better, three times better than, like the whole history about Arthur Ashe. I know we're going to get to that um in a moment, in another section, but the idea of what it meant to play tennis and represent your community. And I think Venus and Serena were an interesting switch of like, we play tennis and we respect the rules, but we are who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We are black girls from Compton, California.
Yeah.
And we're going to enjoy the sport. We're going to bring ourselves to the sport. And I think that was a really big change and a sea change, really on the level of a Jordan or Iverson, probably more,
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
just like changing the framing of how people came into a sport and changed the sport forever, right?
Yeah.
Like there's before them and after them now, right? Like, and there's not many tennis players in the world that you think about like there was before and after. I might name 8 to 10, right, male or female. But yeah, just really bringing that to the table, like them showing up as who they were, bringing that level of creativity that tennis, especially as a sport, doesn't highly prize.
Yeah. 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 And it's and I think for those that may be listening, that if you I grew up I mean, yeah, I grew up in a tennis family, in a tennis household, where at least the idea of like, oh, tennis is on. Let me watch. Even when I was young, and when the Wimbledon would come on HBO, and at least when HBO was on. But I'm gonna say
Yeah,
for a future
no,
conversation, where like
yeah,
the times I realized, I guess that's why I never saw that show, because I didn't have cable during that window when that show was hot. But that's for a
yeah,
future conversation about what you
yeah,
see in the world, right? But even because it wasn't always like, I didn't always, sometimes I was like, oh man, maybe there's a movie on. It's like, oh, it's mad coverage of Wimbledon. Okay. And then like I might catch myself into watching it, and like Wild World of Sports. And then he's watching, McEnroe, and what's my man's about the dudes from the 80s.
Jimmy Connors,
Jimmy
Von
Connor,
Lindell,
Lando,
Beyond Borg,
yeah.
yeah,
Agassi later, the
actually,
90s.
yeah,
Uh,
Sampras, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, Steffi
absolutely,
Graf, Navratilova.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, like, so, you know, some folks may or may not like enjoy tennis as a sport, right? Like to watch, like they may not have the affinity, and I could dig that, but it's a beautiful game. It's a fun game. But like many things, it also is wrapped in, a structure and systems of class and power and you know, in a very specific context, the you know, if you can get through that and just see the sport, right, see the game, you know, see the focus, see the things that you know, go into how the game is played, it's quite exciting, right? And it's also, it's very difficult to master, right? So you can appreciate how someone, you know, and what Serena herself has done, what Venus has done in their time. It's but also, like, what is it, you know, what's the future of the sport, you know what I mean, in terms of, you know, it has not filtered into, I mean, I think since we've lived through this generation of particularly in tennis and golf, you know, with I think Tiger Woods being the banner on the other side of that, where folks kind of felt like maybe these sports would have a broader opening to our communities on a larger scale, right? Which I think the infrastructure for that to happen just still isn't there totally. You know, obviously there are actually, you know, I know folks that, you know, black folks that have come up playing tennis. I mean, you're one of them. I know some other folks too, but it's still, you know, maybe in the broad way that folks would have thought with all this happening over the last 20 years, you know, 25 years, that it'd be like, oh man, like now it's, you know, which also may be a bit of like fantasy land about the way we project why people do or don't do stuff.
Yes, and I would add, yeah, I think we, you know, as sometimes, you know, black folks lovingly we suffer from this thing of once someone kicked in the door, we're all coming in.
Yeah,
And sometimes that's the case, and sometimes that's not the case.
yeah,
Because there's also an agency conversation that does everyone want to come in here?
right.
Right? Does everyone feel like this is where they want to be?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, a lot of black folks have been playing a lot of tennis, as you well know, for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And tennis ain't been an exclusively white thing for a long time. However, that doesn't mean that every athlete is going to pick between a basketball and a tennis racket at 10, right?
Yeah,
Because, and this is the thing about how we think about, again, going back to systems, any player that becomes, I don't care if someone says you're the 300th best player in the world, which means that you probably got a kind of a tough time going from tournament to tournament, you know, surviving. You are the 300th best player out of millions of people who play tennis.
yeah,
Like you literally are the 299. There's only 299 people who play tennis better than you anywhere in the world.
yeah,
That's difficult,
yeah,
right? That is difficult to do. And I think that, you know, we often frame these sports like, okay, once one person, and I would say in women's tennis, you see it more than men's tennis. Like there's no accident. You see like there's no one like LeBron like figure in men's tennis. And I think that's the same reason there's no LeBron figure in United States soccer, frankly.
right.
Like the systems make it as such. There's a level of support that's not the same way that's in football or that's in basketball. And there are so many more infrastructures that have been created to cut the cost, to do all those kind of things, to perform at the highest level of tennis like they do. You need coaches, you need trainers. You've had to train every day of your life. And that means at some point you probably either have to live somewhere warm or have access to indoor courts all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way getting around the cost of it, right? Like that's not a thing where you someone say, oh, just go out and hit, like just go ahead and hit on the on the courts on the nets in your neighborhood with the cracks in the what's the names. Like it's not that,
Yeah, it's not that.
so I do think it gives a level again of their resilience and them being forces of nature to have two people from the same family be able to do that at this highest level while still inspiring. I think obviously black girls, but I think Serena's impact on the sport has been like meta. You know what I mean? It's like she inspires black people just across the board, even if they never play tennis,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's a meta level, not just like a this makes another girl want to pick up a tennis racket. right? But I think there is a place there to think about the importance and power of the support systems that we put around players who are identified as good. Because frankly, people know by the time you're 12 or 13 how good you're going to be.
Yeah.
Like it ain't this is kind of like soccer. You know what I mean? Like it's not one of them things that you can go to the pros because you had a what do you call when you got real tall, like you had one of them height.
The late
You know
growth
what I
spurt,
mean?
like
Yeah, you
you
had a
was doing
growth
something
spurt
else, but then
between junior and senior year, and you were 6 feet, and then you were 6'7" the next in senior year. So automatically you became good, or you gained 100 pounds and you became an offensive linebacker. It's not that kind of sport. So again, it is a testament to who they are, what their family, and I say their entire family, because well, obviously people focus on their father. It is their entire family that created a system around them to be able to flourish.
indeed. Yeah. So just looking at the time, I wanted just to drop a note and get the sister her an appropriate send off salute. You know what I'm saying, as she exits the sport on a day-to-day basis, but always elevate the reality that and I think that she and her family even spoke to like the commitment of others, what I mean, as you just framed, to their success, right? Within the sport is also, determination of their family, determination, of other folks who either, depending on how you read the story, either got in line with the plan, you know what I'm saying, or appreciated actually what was happening there and didn't, quite frankly, undermine, the opportunity, for their capacity to be expressed and seen in the real world. So, you know what I'm saying? Props out to, Serena, props to the family. And thank you.
And one thing, yeah, right. Well, check this out, Serena. We kicking it. But on that thing, I want to give a shout out to Magic Johnson. But what I mean by that is this, Magic Johnson, I think, set the place for athletes, in their lives during their sports lives and then after their sports lives to become involved in the business world. And I think, when you look at Serena being one of the first investors in Andreessen Horowitz's Cultural Leadership Fund, which is a fund all by like Black and brown influencers to really get into the venture capital world, right? And she was one of the first ones and is like a really big partner in that space. You know what I mean? And so I think it's also about her saying like, hey, I'm still relatively young and I want to have the rest of my life to do my next chapter. Which is also a testament to kind of like the phrase like know when to get out, but go on to another thing, man. So, just shout out to her and her other ventures as well as she builds a next level of the conversation about what she means to the world.
Indeed. So with that, we'll keep it brief and we'll circle back, but I don't have anything else at the moment. So peace.
See y'all next time. Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Good Brothers is a production of the Oldhead podcast, and you can support the podcast by listening, number 1, 2, rating and subscribing wherever you listen, and then 3, sharing with someone else, or on your social media, or whatever have you, or send a message. Anything that allows others to join in on the conversation is what makes it great. You can also support by becoming a patron on Patreon. Just search Justice Rajee and you'll find my page there where you can subscribe, or go to the Etsy shop and buy something. Not that it's a little bit behind, but it's going to be updated soon, or soon enough, who knows. But anyway, I appreciate you spending time with us, and always take the best part for yourself. Peace.